Our hearts go out to all who grieve the 26 victims who were killed at the Sandy Hill Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. Our hearts go to all of those families that have experienced such a profound loss. And these losses are enormous. If you look at just some of the biographies of those who perished, you look at the biographies of young children, of 6-year-old Charlotte Bacon, who begged her mom to be able to wear her new pink dress and boots to school, and she wore them that day. Or Jack Pinto. This little boy was a big Giants fan, and in particular a big fan of the Giants wide receiver Victor Cruz, and he's going to be buried wearing Cruz's number 80 jersey. Or Mary Sherlach and Don Hochsprung, principals, who died lunging at the shooter. Victoria Soto, a teacher, who put herself between the shooter and her students and paid with her life. And these losses are so enormous and so painful. And in particular, they're painful because it's the deaths of young people, of children, that is so hard and so difficult to get over. You know, the Bible tells us that when Jacob believes that his son Joseph is dead, that Vayima'en lihinachem, that Jacob refused to be consoled. And certainly he refused to be consoled because it's next to impossible to be consoled over the loss of a child. But in particular, he refused to be consoled because the death seemed so unnecessary. Here he had sent Joseph away to go check on his brothers, and all of a sudden he disappeared with no apparent cause in something that would seemingly be preventable. And indeed, the Midrash says, Ein mitnachmim min hachayim, that one can't be consoled for the living. Now, the Midrash may have a particular intent with that statement, but I believe the statement also embraces the interpretation that you can't be consoled for someone who should be living. Someone who goes to school in the morning and should be home at night, and they should be fine because they're a 6 or 7-year-old child. That type of loss you can never be consoled over because it simply doesn't make any sense. Now, when we face such a terrible tragedy and we begin to ask questions, of course, philosophically we ask, why do bad things happen to good people? And anyone who's asked that question once or twice or 3 times, or if in the course of a lifetime you've asked it hundreds of times, anyone who's asked that question realizes that there's no answer for it. But as Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik articulates it, perhaps there are no answers for the why question, why bad things happen to good people, but there are answers to the what question. What do we do to respond to evil in this world? How do we respond to it? And you know what's fascinating is that the Talmud in Yoma 23a, Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph, tells a fascinating tale, a chilling and fascinating tale, of 2 Kohanim, 2 priests in the temple, who were competing to do the service at the same time. And the old system in the temple was first come, first serve. Whoever would come and get to do the service first would be entitled to it. If you ran up the ramp and got there first, you got it. And here there's a story told about 2 Kohanim, 2 priests, competing over doing the service, and they both run up the ramp to the altar, and one pulls away and starts to get the lead, and the other one pulls out a knife and stabs the one that was in the lead. And here you have one Kohen, one priest, murdering another priest in the middle of the temple, all in a competition of who gets to do the service. And as the Talmud tells it, in the aftermath of this, a eulogy was given by a rabbi, by Rav Tzadok. And Rav Tzadok gets up and gives a eulogy basing himself on the biblical image of the Egla Arufa the animal that's offered as an atonement when a dead body is found near a city, and they measure usually to see which city is it closest to. And this is, of course, a rule that's found in the 21st chapter of Sefer Dvarim, of the book of Deuteronomy. And the Talmud says that Rav Tzadok gets up and says, where do we take the measurements for this dead body from? Do we measure it to the temple? Do we measure it to its courts? Do we measure it to the city of Jerusalem? And the intent of this particular sermon, this particular eulogy by Rav Tzadok, is to underline the fact that when a murder occurs in the center of the temple, when two priests are implicated in a competition, and one of them ends up killing the other, that this murder is not simply something that exists in a vacuum, but one must measure in every direction to see how we may be responsible. And this is a powerful thought, the thought that Rav Tzadok is reminding us of. In many ways, when a terrible event occurs, everybody has to assess their own personal responsibility. If, as Hillary Clinton put it in the title of one of her books, it takes a village to raise a child, then one must imagine that it takes a village to raise a murderer as well. And certainly there will be debates on the level of policy, whether it be issues of gun control, whether it be issues of violence in our culture, whether it be how we deal with the mentally ill in our society. Certainly there are going to be a whole series of discussions about policy, and they are necessary, and they are important, and perhaps certain policies need to be changed. But what we need to do is to reflect as individuals as well. What is our responsibility? How do we contribute to the violence in our larger society? Everyone has to understand that we're all interlinked, and that even some of the smallest gestures that we do can be measured even far away in Newtown, Connecticut. Everything that we do in our society affects everyone else. And if we have a society that has far too much violence, each and every one of us has to reflect on our own responsibility. I recently saw a powerful piece, also in many ways a disturbing but powerful piece, by Dov Lipman in the op-ed section of the Times of Israel, in which he spoke about the value of saying hello, and how he had a friend at one point that he simply met in the middle of the street who was walking by him, and he said hello to him. And this friend actually started by making a hostile remark to him. And over the years, he befriended this man. And the man had been a Korean War veteran. He had experienced a great deal of trauma. And it was by being befriended that this man became connected to Dov Lipman. Dov Lipman moved away from that particular town. It was in Cincinnati. And before he left, his friend went to him and said, please make sure that when I pass away, you'll say Kaddish for me. I don't have any family. I'd like you to say Kaddish for me when I pass away. And of course, Dov said, it's going to be years. Don't rush. After he moves out of town 2 days later, he gets a call that his friend is dead. His friend had committed suicide. And Dov Lipman realized that it was all those years that his friend stayed alive simply because he had said hello. This is not a made-up story. This is not a fable. This is absolute truth. Not only has it occurred, but it continues to occur. Saying hello to one person can make an enormous impact. Every way that we treat others in this society, if we treat others with greater respect, if we take into account people's disabilities, if we engage others in a respectful fashion, we can truly make society a better place. I don't know why such tragedies occur. I don't know why God allows it. I do know what my responsibility is. My responsibility is to make the world a better place. And perhaps we can even start by making it a better place just by saying hello.